traffic, Towpoint 4041 uniform, departing 1 lot for rider and tow.
Getting 20 knots up, a second later 20 knots down, getting slammed forward, backward with 30 and 40 knot horizontal gusts. It's just very turbulent air. Everything's flying in the cockpit. Controls are not enough to overcome some of the air movements, and just being mentally prepared to be on the ride of a bucking bronco, essentially getting pulled up through the rotor.
This is Soaring the Sky, a glider pilot's podcast, coming to you from the Mid-Atlantic region here in the United States, and bringing you great soaring content from glider pilots all over the globe. We now join Chuck and our guest pilot.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you for joining us for another exciting soaring adventure. For a while now, we've been asking you to share your chats with a friend or a gliding buddy about a recent or interesting flight. Well, our friend Tom Coussens did just that, and recently he caught up with Zach Yamauchi, who just had a 1,039 kilometer flight in mountain wave in the beautiful Sierras. Now, Zach is going to take us along on this flight so we can see and feel what it's like to experience that. Stay tuned after Tom and Zach, though, because we do have another new segment from Sergio The Soaring Master. But before we get things started, I do want to thank our newest Patreon pilot, Stephen Kelty. Thank you, Stephen. We appreciate your support. Now, if you want to show us some love here on the pod and help us continue to bring you more great content, just hit the link in the show notes or go to patreon.com/soaringthesky. And if you don't want to use Patreon, we do have some other options for you at our website, soaringthesky.com. If you're not able to help us out financially, that's okay. It would be very helpful if you subscribe to the pod and leave us a 5-star review and tell us how much you like the podcast. Wings and Wheels has been serving the soaring and sport aviation community for over 30 years. They hands down have the largest and most comprehensive inventory of sailplane and soaring supplies in North America, and they ship globally. Nearly everything you'll find on their site is in stock and ready for same-day shipping. Wings and Wheels is the exclusive American representative for HPH sailplanes. Be sure to check out the Twin Shark, their latest launch. They are also now the exclusive distributor in North America for the new Just Soaring Sim Pro. The team has thousands of hours of flying experience in gliders and airplanes, staffed by Adam, Kelly, Julie, and Sean. A friendly voice will answer when you call or email. Check them out at wingsandwheels.com.
Hi, this is Tom Coussens, and I'm a sailplane pilot and tow pilot. And I recently was interviewed by Chuck in episode 105, if you want to get a bit of my background. Today, we're having a very special, kind of a small chat with Zach Yamauchi, who just 2 days ago flew 1,039 kilometers in mountain wave in the Sierras. And we're going to get into all the details about that. I met Zach at a safari in Lone Pine, California, in the Owens Valley there in 2020. And we all showed up for dinner, and there was this young kid amongst all us old graybeards. And I said, oh, that must be Zach Yamauchi's son. And it turns out it was Zach Yamauchi. And he was out in his glider an hour before anybody else, towing up and scratching in the foothills, just trying to make things work and working all the very tough stuff. We were always looking for better lift, and we were just all spoiled. And Zach was out there mining the little stuff and learning a lot more than we were. So Zach is very dedicated to soaring. He bought a run-out Discus A and refinished it and got it in the air, and it's his keeper now. And he's here to talk about all the preparations and basically what it took to fly in mountain waves. So, Zach, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
Absolutely. So Zach, tell us what is mountain wave flying like? It's give us kind of the rundown of that.
Sure. So, mountain wave flying, especially in the Sierra Nevada mountains, is some of the most spectacular soaring that can be had, in my opinion. Currently, the longest glider flight on record, Jim Payne did back in the 2015, 2,907 kilometers in the Sierra Nevada. Smokes. So I'm a far ways from the longest possible flights, but the flights that are done there, 2,000 K flights are a common thing. Probably about once a year on average happens there. And the speeds that people reach and the pilots are able to reach in the mountain wave are just mind blowing. It's 200 kph plus average speeds are kind of the norm for those long flights. But with that spectacular scenery and at high altitudes, incredibly fast and long flights come a lot of risks, and definitely want to touch on those. The risks involved of flying high, cold, and fast in the Sierras. But what questions do you have for me, Tom?
Well, so the key thing then is, looking at your OLC trace, the one thing that I kind of gathered from it was that was just the tip of the iceberg. And so I would like to hear about what it took to even start to think about this. There are all the preparations, first of all. And so what kind of conditions were you looking for? It seems like you have to hit the silver bullet to get the right conditions to actually fly it. Yeah,
definitely. So this is a flight. My goal for this flight was to do all three of my diamond badge requirements. So it's first one's a 5,000 meter, 16,404 feet. I believe that's the conversion. Climb from the lowest point in flight. So that's typically your tow release altitude. A 300 kilometer out and return declared, and then a 500 kilometer multi-turn point. Do all of those in one flight. And to put a cherry on top of that, I was planning for 1,000K total. That would be 1,000K OLC, not diploma length, but nonetheless a long flight. And looking at the airspace I had to work with, which is 2508, restricted area 2508 down in the southern Sierras. That's a block of airspace that Edwards Air Force Base, Lemoore in the Central Valley, that's a naval base, and then China Lake, used for military aircraft training. It's typically, I think, entirely VFR above flight level 180 up there, which is different from normal instrument airways above that altitude. And it's military controlled, so we do have to seek out special clearances from the controlling agencies to access that as glider pilots, but doing so allows us to do these flights that are slightly, I don't like to go crazy high altitude like some pilots, but higher enough that you can be more established in the wave and have a little bit more clearance over the mountains, which there's plenty of peaks there that are over 14,000 feet. So I've been eyeing conditions that would allow me to do that flight for quite some time. It's kind of been probably the last 2 years since my last big wave flights to do something like this. And earlier this season, I took a drive out to Inyokern. Conditions were looking like it was lining up. Everything was good. And then didn't ring my glider that night, and I'm glad I did. And that whole night it was gusting about 40 knots consistently, gusting to 60, I think at time, 50 or 60 on the ground. So, you have to be really picky about what conditions you're going to fly in, and even willing to make the drive and scrub it if everything's not exactly perfect. And in this case, I was fortunate enough that the conditions kind of did turn out to be perfect. Maybe not quite as strong as forecast, but still strong enough to do my goals, and also a lot more benign conditions on the ground, even than what we're most of the time looking for wave. So takeoff and landing on the ground were essentially calm winds, which is quite a contrast to the, I think I saw 70 plus knots up high in the flight levels on Friday. So fortunate to have those conditions. And then, some of the preparation that went into this flight, in terms of flying at these altitudes. Essentially, for this flight, I was targeting between 19 and 21,000 feet. Like I said, to give me a little bit more clearance over the terrain, and then keeping in the wave, because once you get dropped down, you could have rotor on those big mountains up to 15, 16,000 feet. So having that buffer a couple thousand feet there, as well as allowing you to make jumps if there's transitions or breaks in the wave, having that extra altitude to glide through those is extremely helpful, especially when you're battling 70, 80 knot crosswinds. It really takes a hit, really puts a hit in your glide performance there.
My gosh. So what do you think, how high do you think that particular wave could have gone? You restricted yours down to below 24,000 at your max.
Yep.
Could it have, do you have an idea how much higher that wave could have gone?
Yeah, looking at the SkySight forecast, it was showing up into the low 30s. I think the record out of Inyokern is in the 50s, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. But yes. Just depending on the day, it can typically go much higher than I like to fly. For me, it's not so much about exploring the high altitude stuff, more about doing the distance and having a little bit extra comfort in that distance is kind of ironically being more comfortable being up high where it's colder, but you don't want to drop in low below those mountains because the rotor there is incredibly violent.
Mm-hmm. So tell me about preparation, say, of the glider. What did you need to do to make the glider ready?
Yeah, so flying these flights, obviously, once you're off tow and climbing up through into the lower flight levels, it's extremely cold. I think freezing level for that day was probably like 12,000 feet or something, and spent the whole day above that. Yeah, being up there, it's obviously extremely cold, very low oxygen environment. So making sure that you have a proven out oxygen system and one that's reliable, and then you have redundancy. So I fly with an extra oxygen bottle as well. In addition to that, yeah, I have heated shoes, or heated boots are a must, and then also having the ability to have I have a heated vest. I didn't actually turn it on that flight; I was warm enough. But should things get cold, having that ability for a little bit of extra heat, especially when you're sitting still for that flight was 7 hours, so not much movement for all that time. Additionally, for that canopy icing is almost a guarantee above the freezing levels. So I was experiencing it a lot above 19,000 feet. Pretty much any time above 19,000 feet, I was getting a little frost on the canopy. And then up when I went to the highest point to get my diamond altitude badge, the whole canopy was completely frozen over, except for about a third to half of it, which I had covered with a second pane of acrylic, doubled up in size. So essentially you have a double line window, similar to like ski goggles or even house windows, that you have the double pane, provides extra insulation, and then prevents frost or condensation from building up inside of it. So without that, I'd be completely IFR inside of my own cockpit.
Aerox, the #1 in portable and engineered aviation oxygen systems, your source for FAA-approved oxygen mask and portable oxygen systems, and now introducing the Aerox Pro 2 Plus Flight Bag portable oxygen system. Small, lightweight, and simple to use, the Pro 2 Plus is perfect for the occasional user who wants the flexibility to access higher altitudes without worry about flying impaired. Now available at Aerox distributors and at Aerox.com. So remember, our friends at Aerox, engineered for aviators.
And in addition to that, of understanding the risks of flying wave, of quite a few things. First, even starting on the ground, like I talked about, is extremely powerful ground winds on both takeoff and landing. Even when you're rigging, you could be there dead calm and the rotor sweeps through, and you got your glider's wings in place and maybe not pinned or something, and you get a 40 knot gust coming through out of nowhere. There goes your glider. So understanding that that's a very real possibility and very unpredictable. Yeah, and then oxygen deprivation's a real thing, cold's a real thing, hypoxia is definitely a thing, dehydration, the lack of moisture up there. The list goes on and on of how hazardous and how unforgiving mountain wave is. And I think one of the keys for anybody interested in this is completely fully understanding all the risks associated with this type of flying, being real with yourself of your risk tolerance, what you're willing to accept, and going from there, and evaluating if this is truly something for you.
Yeah, definitely. It's much more risky than just thermaling down, below 18,000 feet and just having a good old time in the Sierras. This is something that you have to take very seriously. Many people have died of hypoxia, things like that, and other problems. And so, this is not something you just casually go and do, for sure.
Yeah, this is mountain wave. Wave flying in general is on the higher end of the risk curve of soaring, and then when you add flying in one of the highest mountain ranges that on the world to fly in, the risk just compounds there. So truly understanding what you're getting yourself into, as well as learning lessons from past pilots who have paid hefty prices for flying in these conditions.
Yeah, but the main thing is, why do it then? Why do it? Zach, why do you do it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the exploration aspect of exploring the wave, really getting to be super intimate with the atmosphere, interacting with it, experience the raw power of it. The views from 20,000 feet over the snow-capped Sierras are just something that you can see it in pictures. You could look out the side of an airliner window flying in that area, but it's just completely different, breathtaking experience seeing it with your own eyes.
Mm-hmm.
as well as fulfilling a personal challenge of mine, or a personal goal of mine. That's also part of the motivation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So what about the route? Yeah, there's the one thing that you shows your turn points, your start and end points, and also the basic route and how you were going to achieve that 1,000K. What sort of planning were you doing there?
Yeah, sure. So 2508, that block of restricted airspace that we're flying in, has a the upper boundary of it. It's about 170 kilometers north of Inyo, where we were taking off of. And so 170 times 6, which is how many legs you can get with an LLC flight, gets you right around 1,000K. And so I picked made two turn points, one just to the west of the airport, about 5 miles, centered right in the wave band, and then a northerly turn point up north, still also centered in this forecast wave band, just south, like about a mile south of that boundary, half mile south of that boundary. And my plan that day was to do a 6 legs between those two, kind of just what we call a yo-yo, back and forth on that line. And then targeting, staying between, hopefully getting up higher, above 18,000 early in the flight, and then being pretty comfortable in that wave. Starting out for that flight, the tow, one of the other hazards with flying mountain wave is you have to go, there's no way around it. You have to get through the rotor to get into the laminar flow. And so getting through the rotor is oftentimes, I'm pretty much always going to be on tow. Sometimes you'll get off tow low and essentially rotor thermal, climb up through the rotor off tow before punching into the wave. In this case, and on this tow, as well as another tow in the past, just some of the most violent experiences in the cockpit of a glider, where the Vario's hitting 20 knots up, a second later 20 knots down, getting slammed forward, backward with 30, 40 knot horizontal gusts. It's just very turbulent air. Everything's flying in the cockpit. Controls are not enough to overcome some of the air movements, and just being mentally prepared to be on the ride of a bucking bronco, essentially getting pulled up through the rotor. And also understanding that, it's not just your life at stake here, it's a tow pilot's life as well. And fortunately, having willing tow pilots, in this case Dan Klein out of Inyo, to provide that tow for me, knowing that we kind of have a mutual trust there, of that he has my life and I'm looking out for his life. And so in this tow in particular, the wave got so violent, there was so much slack rope in the tow line, probably close to 100 feet, or half the tow rope, where the tow rope was starting to loop back behind my wing. Essentially, I was overflying the slack in the rope, and just like we do for rope breaks when you're training for that, and understanding what to do in a rope break. That decision isn't made when the rope breaks. That decision is made when you're on the ground, right? You're gonna land straight ahead if you ever have a rope break below 200 feet. No questions asked. That decision's made before you take off, and so when it happens, or if it happens, all you're doing is executing on a plan you already have. Mm-hmm. So it's the same case with this tow. Is anytime when there's slack rope that's unrecoverable for me, that's anytime the tow rope gets essentially parallel with my wing. In this case, it went even slightly beyond that before I had time to get to the release, but not much. I ended up releasing a couple of times. I was able, in more minor slack ropes before that on this tow, was able to recover. But at that point, it's pretty much unrecoverable, or at least not recoverable in a safe fashion behind the tow plane, and making sure that, you don't, at a minimum, break the rope, but other things would put the tow plane in a bad attitude, put yourself in a bad attitude, break tow releases, things like that. And so, on this tow in particular, about 6,500, I think that airport's 2,400, so 4,000 feet off the ground, still in the rotor. I made the decision to release. Fortunately, we're on the upside of the rotor, so I was able to do a couple turns and then punch into the wave. But knowing that that's to be expected when you're flying in these conditions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. So then when you got into the wave and started climbing, and then basically, what was it like then on the yo-yo legs? What sort of things were you looking for when you were going northbound and southbound to basically, what were you looking for to stay in the wave, or what did you want to, that whole thing? What was your philosophy in basically making the distance between the turn points?
Yeah. So for those of you who haven't flown wave, I'm kind kind of been harping on all the crazy stuff that can happen in it. But once you're established in wave, it's one of the most magical experiences, because might as well be on your couch at home in your living room, because the wave is perfectly laminar. The glider will fly hands off because there's there's pretty much zero turbulence in the upper atmosphere, higher up in the atmosphere in undisturbed air. You're at a pretty severe crab angle with 60, 70 knot crosswinds that you're dealing with. But other than that, getting the crab angle right and then pointing crosswind, essentially, the glider's pretty comfortable to fly in at that point, minus the cold, dealing with that. But as if you're bundled up, it's not terrible. Once I was established in the wave, the first leg of that was a little bit slow going, actually a lot slow going, a lot more than I was expected. The wave at that point, which I had expected looking at the forecast, would be a little bit weaker for that first half of the first leg, essentially. If you know the geography there, from Inyo up to Mount Whitney, about halfway between my start and end turn points, or start and finish turn points of each leg. That part was slow going. The mountains are lower there, so not as consistent wave there. So I was trying to kind of scratch as much altitude as I could at those strong points before jumping on to the next essentially prominent peak. And I got a couple bumps there. However, when I did get up to Mount Whitney, so Mount Whitney's the highest mountain in the U.S., 14,500 feet approximately. That's typically where the best wave starts. I think it's colloquially known as the Mount Whitney Superhighway. So that's where on good days you're seeing netto 15, even netto 20 knots up consistently. However, got there a little bit lower than I wanted to be, probably about ridge height. Rotor is definitely found below ridge height, sometimes up above it. So I was in for a little bit of rotor working there. Spent about 10 minutes or so climbing in the rotor. It's being in the most violent thermal you could imagine, and then multiply it by 2 essentially, where half your turn's going up at 30 knots and the other half's going down at 15 knots or 20 knots, and your airspeed indicator is moving just as fast as your variometer with the horizontal gusts.
Oh,
so it's not comfortable, but working that rotor a little bit there was enough, gain enough altitude, and then be able to punch back in the wave. And from there, that's where the really strong wave picked up. So it was like pull the stick back to min sync, and then be in complete laminar lift, just going up 800 to 1,000 feet a minute, 1,200 feet per minute even there, of just essentially hovering in one place on the ground because the headwinds are so strong, pointing into the wind and just going vertically up. Screamingly fast for a glider. And then once I was established there, getting about to 20,000 feet or so, working my way up north to the end of my first leg. Once I got up there, turning back around and essentially doing the same thing and repeat 5 more times. Going back down south on that leg, conditions were definitely improving, and I was able to also tank up on altitude around Mount Whitney. I think at that point around 23,500 feet to get my diamond altitude goal done, and then head south back towards Inyo, turn that turn point, climb a little bit there, and then head back north. Most of the time cruising between 100, 110 knots indicated, which depending on the headwind component of the crosswind at that point, it's to 120 to 150 knots ground speed is what I'm saying in those fast runs. And then occasionally when you want to climb, you don't really thermal and wave, you more so just pull back the stick, and your sync rate decreases. The vertical movement of the air mass is such that you just end up going up when your sync rate decreases.
Our longtime sponsor of the show, the Soaring Academy, is engaged in nonprofit outreach work with local area veterans and also with young people for the STEM programs at their top-notch gliderport facility just outside of Los Angeles, nestled near the north side of the San Gabriel Mountains. They also have a fantastic flight school and are continuing to turn out great glider pilots every month. If you like to donate to their nonprofit initiatives or learn more about their flight school, go to soaringacademy.org or check them out on Instagram at Soaring Academy.
Yes, yeah. Wow, that's amazing. And yet you're flying in kind of a crab, right? You're not actually, you're not flying. I mean, your bearing is one thing. Your actual track is quite a bit different. Because your nose is into the wind. 30 degrees or so. So you're kind of looking up the side where you're really going.
Yeah, definitely. It's something to get used to when you're moving along the ground, like at a 40-degree angle or so. And it's something to be very cognizant of, because the second you you lapse in that and start pointing your nose to your ground track, essentially to where you want to go, you immediately drift downwind. And because you're dealing with 70 knot crosswind or so, that downwind drift happens super quickly, and then to recover to get back on track of the direction you were heading, you're battling a severe headwind to do so. So it takes much longer to go back upwind, to track back upwind, than it does to track downwind.
Yeah, that makes sense. Wow. So, any kind of during those legs, was there any particular thing that surprised you? I don't know what else you can be surprised by. But was anything of note in any of those particular legs that was different than the rest?
Sure. One of the many other hazards of flying waves, dealing with moisture in the atmosphere. The day I chose to fly in and the days I've been eyeing flying wave, it's always days that are near to blue or completely blue days. Fortunately, in the 2020s here, we have access to SkySight, which when you overlay that forecast on your flight computer, typically you get a pretty good sense of at least where to look for the wave without the need for having lenticulars or markers. And having blue wave, then you have much less risk of getting trapped either above a layer or getting pushed into a lenticular cloud, which are immediate way to go IMC, ice over. There's quite a few pilots ending up in clouds and wave and not having bad outcomes there. So I intentionally avoid flying with moisture. In the last leg, there was a little bit of moisture developing, but fortunately it was much higher than I was flying, probably closer to 280 or 300 in terms of flight levels, up there higher, but something I was happy to not have to deal with during that flight.
Wow. So there you've done it. You've got your 1,000K. You're coming back on their last leg, and you want to get down. What was it like to descend from there to land?
Yeah. So I landed about 4:15 or so, if I remember correctly. Sunset that night was 4:50 or so in Inyokern. So sun was definitely low on the horizon at that point. It kind of felt spooky. Sunsets in the winter just feels a lot different. A lot more different than it does in the summer. So those are the conditions I was landing in. The sun was also behind some clouds out further in the distance, 50 miles or so out to the west, and so it was pretty not too dark, but definitely felt kind of gloomy coming down, and then heading back to the airport, and then just kind of spiraling down, full spoilers out, and obviously making sure your gear works up high. I always check that before I start descending. So if anything's you're having problems with anything, you're not troubleshooting your gear or spoilers in the traffic pattern while battling rotor as well. As expected, that rotor normally sets up from the base of the foothills over Inyokern to the west of Inyokern, directly overhead the airport. And so again, my last trip through the rotor was on the way down. It's time to tighten the belts up and then kind of make sure everything in the cockpit's secure, and then just do a kind of slow controlled spiral down, keeping the airspeed up to an extent so that you're not at risk of stalling your spinning in the turbulence. Also keeping it low enough that your load factors don't get crazy high when you hit that turbulence. So just kind of doing circles, getting down, kind of gritting my teeth as I come through the rotor the last time. And then fortunately on this day, the rotor subsided a little bit, maybe 500 or 1,000 feet of a pattern altitude, and then coming back into land. We were very, very lucky on this flight to have almost dead calm ground winds when we landed. I think they were calm for most of the day. You need to fully expect, anticipate, and prepare for is landing in 30, even 40 knot sustained winds when the rotor hits down at the airport or wherever you end up landing. And so, we're lucky on this day to not really have that to deal with. But in the past, landing in 30 knots is really not fun, and something you might get trapped in your glider of just kind of steering it on the runway, keeping it pointed in the wind, in the event that those winds are consistent and persistent, and then having someone come essentially rescue you. Vehicle, your tow gear, all that packed up, and getting the glider someplace where it's secure, where the wind could die down.
Wow, amazing. So that was good. So all in all, it was kind of like almost like the dream flight in that regard, at least. You weren't struggling on the ground in prep, and you also had a very peaceful D-rig afterwards. So that's really good.
Yeah, most certainly. Yeah, the flight was. I'm happy to accomplish all my goals on that flight. I'd say it was the conditions were a bit more difficult than forecast, but not not crazy difficult. It was just a couple more transitions between areas of good strong lift and less consistent lift than I was expecting. But overall, yeah, it was a mostly pleasurable experience. Very happy to have ground handling on this day not be a factor.
Yeah, that's great. Well, overall, just a tremendous success. And man, I hate to use a pun, but you really made waves by that flight. That's for sure.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Real props to you. You're making a name for yourself, especially among us guys in the Southern Sierras. That's for sure.
Well, good.
Well, thank you very much, Zach.
Stepped over you, but I was just going to say, hopefully making a name for myself in a good way and not a bad way.
Absolutely, Zach. There's no question about that. It's just from a personal standpoint, the thing that inspires me about you is your constant desire to learn and to improve and to be better at what you're doing. No conditions are poor enough, too poor for you. You'll just go up and fly it. And that teaches guys like me to get out there and toe up and fly anyhow. So, power to you.
You don't learn much when you're flying easy conditions. It's the difficult conditions where so much learning and improving goes on. And so not being afraid of those conditions is the most critical thing you can do to improve your soaring, in my opinion, is flying those days that you wouldn't normally want to fly from fun perspective, but something where you could really learn and take away lessons, especially in those weekdays.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's, like I say, that's real inspiration for us to just get out there and fly, even when it isn't just superstar kind of conditions. Well, Zach, thank you very much for taking the time. I know you're still on a high from that tremendous flight, and I thank you for giving me the time to get a complete rundown. This has been super exciting to hear about it, and look forward to your continued adventures.
Yeah, likewise, and thanks for taking the time. I'm glad I could share the story with a little bit wider audience than just local California folks.
Absolutely. The world is hearing your story now.
All right, take care.
All right, take care, Zach. Great thermals to you, and we'll catch you on the grid somewhere.
Perfect.
Okay, bye now.
Just Soaring, the makers of the Glider Sim Pro Sailplane Simulator Cockpit, would like to congratulate German pilot Ben Fest for his recent victory in the first ever FAI-sanctioned aviation esports event in history, the Sailplane World Grand Prix, which Ben won after several days of exciting competition against some of the top Condor soaring pilots from around the world. If you are looking for a best-in-class dedicated sailplane simulator cockpit for Condor or Microsoft Flight Sim, look no further than the Just Soaring Glider Sim Pro. Check them out at justsoaring.com or at just.soaring on Instagram.
Hi everyone, Sergio The Soaring Master here. In this segment, we're going to talk about flaps and how they work in sailplanes. Flaps are lift devices, so the name already states how they work. They change the amount of lift a wing generates. Positive flaps at lower speeds are straightforward. Deploying flaps will increase the amount of lift your wing generates in comparison with the same unflapped wing at the same speed. At approach speeds, this provides a higher margin from stall, and it also helps glide slope control. More lift will generate more drag, and positive flap settings generate more lift at the expense of glide ratio, thus helping the glide slope control. Some early fiberglass sailplanes did not have spoilers, and they landed only by deploying flaps. Now that positive flaps functioning is clear, let's talk about the mystical negative flap settings. Lift varies proportionally to lift coefficient, but at the square of speed. So in higher speeds, an unflapped wing generates much more lift than needed. This extra lift generates extra drag, and hence the rationale behind negative flaps. They reduce the lift generated by the wing. Thus, you generate less drag at the same speed in comparison with the same unflapped wing at that speed. The reduction of lift coefficient won't affect the overall lift, since the higher speed will offset lift generation. Summing up, you get what you want. Fly faster. but you'll pay less for it with a better L/D in comparison with an unflapped wing at the same speed. Another reason why negative flaps have been adopted in sailplanes is that modern laminar airfoils have been designed to keep the laminar boundary layer stable within a certain range of angle of attack. And by using negative flaps and lowering the wing's lift coefficient, you lower its angle of attack, maintaining it within this best range I mentioned at higher speeds. From the pilot's perspective, flying with flaps is almost like changing gears in a sports car, and the response is immediate. You feel the sailplane accelerating as you change the flap setting to a negative one. Due to mechanical linkage, trim settings are automatically adjusted with each flap setting, so the sailplane is always well trimmed and the stick barely moves as you change gears, as you change the flap settings. The flap lever ends up being much like a throttle, and you get so used to it that once you go back to unflapped sailplanes, your left hand will keep on forever changing an imaginary flap lever. And that's how flaps work in sailplanes. Flying flap sailplanes is awesome. You should try it. I see you in the next episode. For more tips and advice, follow me on Instagram at Soaring Master, or check my website, soaringmaster.com.
If you would like to say hi and let us know where you are enjoying the podcast, we would love to hear from you. If you are a glider pilot and want to share your aviation journey, contact us at chuck@soaringthesky.com or send us a message on our website at soaringthesky.com and Chuck will get in touch with you. We hope you join us next time for another soaring adventure here on Soaring the Sky, a Glider Pilots podcast. Soaring the Sky is written and produced by Chuck Fulton, co-producer Mitch Thompson. Original music for the podcast was written and produced by Kim Spangler. Graphic design for the podcast was created by Zachary Fulton. Voiceover work was done by Michelle Perez.